All right, yes, let's get started. So first of all, my name is Thomas Cease. I'm a graduate student at Texas Christian University and a research assistant at the Institute of Behavioral Research here at TCU. I would like to thank Dr. Yong Yang for serving as my faculty advisor on this project and just really helping me throughout the entire process. That being said, my project is a psychometric evaluation of the state of surrender scale in a substance use population. Instead of me first trying to describe what a state of surrender is, I think an example may serve us best. Oops. So this is the Grinch who stole Christmas. For people who aren't familiar with this story, I will just briefly recap. So at the beginning of the movie, the Grinch is portrayed as this individual who hates Christmas. He hates presents and all things alike. However, about midway through the movie, the Grinch experiences this sudden shift in demeanor, where all of a sudden the Grinch is filled with the Christmas spirit. He now loves things like presents, other people, and even just Christmas in general. Therefore, when referring to a state of surrender, what we are trying to capture is the psychological state that would move such an experience like one seen here in The Grinch. Fortunately, for the sake of our research project, the state of surrender scale was not based on the Grinch movie. Instead, it was based off of the conceptual framework of William James's variety of religious experiences. In this text, James outlines two different types of people, James type 1 and James type 2. Type 1 individuals are known for having a stable, loving upbringing, often coming from families of higher socioeconomic status and not really experiencing difficulties during childhood. Alternatively, for James type 2 individuals, these people are known for having a difficult upbringing throughout childhood. For example, these people come from, James type 2 often come from families of lower socioeconomic status, maybe even being subject to abuse or neglect in childhood. And at the end of the text, ultimately, what James points to is that these two types of people are actually predisposed towards different types of transformative experiences. These two experiences were later quantified by Miller and C. De Baca in their text Quantum Change. For James type 1 individuals, they coined the term gradual types of transformations. These take place over weeks, months, sometimes even years, and oftentimes don't result in long-term behavioral change. In contrast, for James type 2 individuals, they coined the term mystical types of transformations. These are often sudden, taking place over a few minutes or even seconds, more often leaving the person ineffable, unable to explain the experience. And then most importantly, these types of transformations are known for eliciting long-term behavioral change. Therefore, in an attempt to capture this state, the state of surrender scale was developed. The state of surrender scale used in the current study was 8 items. The wording you see here on your screen was what was used in the present study. However, the items with an asterisk next to the item indicates that we have messed with the wording slightly across samples. To date, the state of surrender scale appears in the literature as being related to altered states of consciousness. For example, among people who had recently experienced an intense meditative retreat, a state of surrender was positively associated with mystical experiences. Likewise, for people who had recently consumed psilocybin, a state of surrender was a key predictor of positive experiences, whereas a state of preoccupation was a predictor of negative experiences. In recent pilot studies, however, the state of surrender scale has been tested in alternative populations. For example, in 2017, we tested the scale in a sample of people who had recently been experiencing a personal crisis. What we found was that a state of surrender was positively associated with psychological growth among these participants. When we went back and actually looked at the qualitative data from this study, what we found was that a lot of people were endorsing alcohol use or drug use as the cause of their personal problems. Therefore, or their personal crisis, excuse me. Therefore, we replicated this study in a sample of people who had been experiencing alcohol or problems with alcohol use. And again, a state of surrender was a key predictor of psychological growth. Therefore, the objective of the current study was really threefold. First, we sought to examine the latent structure of the state of surrender scale in a substance use population. Second, we wanted to demonstrate content and convergent validity with other closely related scales. And lastly, we wanted to examine the association between a state of surrender and drug users' motivation for change. We chose motivation for change because motivation for change in itself is a key predictor of early recovery and positive substance use change in drug and alcohol users. The current study recruited participants from Amazon's Mechanical Turk, an online platform used to collect large amounts of data in a short amount of time. We sought approximately 300 individuals who had recently considered, contemplated, or tried to cease drug use in the past 12 months. Inclusion and exclusion criteria required participants be 18 years of age or older, read and understand the plain English language, and demonstrate no signs of past or present severe mental illness. In exchange for participating in the study, all respondents were compensated $3 US. To test the current study's hypotheses, multiple statistical procedures were used. First, to examine the latent structure of the state of surrender scale, exploratory factor analysis with a Verimax rotation was used. Second, to demonstrate convergent and content validity, correlation analysis was used. And then lastly, to examine the association between a state of surrender and motivation for change, a hierarchical multiple regression was used. The final sample resulted in 277 participants ranging in age from 18 to 69. 212 participants identified as male, with the remainder identifying as female. Participants were primarily white, followed by Asian, African American, or other. We also included questions about participants' perceived problem recognition, as well as any past treatment they may have received. As shown here on the figure on our right, 2/3 of our sample endorsed receiving some type of substance use treatment in the past. Over here on our left, again, about 2/3 indicated that their substance use was a slight or moderate problem. About a quarter endorsed a considerable problem, with the remainder indicating either a severe problem or no problem at all. When doing factor analysis, we used a retention criteria of eigenvalue greater than 1 to retain those. Those were the factors we retained. This resulted in a one-factor solution, which was supported by the ski plot. Shown here, the factor loadings with and without rotation. And also of note, the Cronbach alpha value or the internal consistency value, Cronbach alpha, was 0.84, suggesting that this is a reliable measure in this population. Here are the intercorrelations among the 8-item state of surrender scale. What's important to pay attention to here is that all items are significantly correlated without containing excess covariance. Correlation analysis was used to demonstrate convergent and content validity. As expected, the state of surrender was positively associated with affective intensity, optimism, the flourishing scale, and the brief inventory of thriving scale, showing strong convergent validity. As it pertains to content validity, SOS scores were positively associated with post-traumatic growth, problem recognition, desire for help, and drug use severity. Finally, we also included just single item measures, asking participants to report on the amount that they had reduced their drug use since their attempt to quit, as well as their perceived ability to cease drug use in the future. And again, SOS scores were significantly associated with both of these items. To examine the associations between a state of surrender and motivation for change, a hierarchical multiple linear regression was used. In the first step, all covariates, including demographic informations known to predict motivation for change in substance users, were first entered into the regression model as predictors, while problem recognition served as the outcome variable. It wasn't until step 2 that a state of surrender was entered into the regression model as a predictor variable. This same procedure was repeated and carried out with desire for help serving as the outcome variable. When problem recognition was served as the DV in the regression model, the base model, including all covariants, significantly predicted participants' reported problem recognition. When a state of surrender was entered into the regression model at step 2, this explained an additional 24.6 of the observed variance in participant scores and problem recognition. Overall, this model explained 36.3% of the observed variance. We found similar results when desire for help was entered into the regression model as the outcome variable. Again, the base model, including only covariance, significantly predicted desire for help. However, when a state of surrender was entered into the model, this added an additional 28.7 of observed variance. Overall, this model explained just under 40% of participants reported observed variance in desire for help. In summary, the current study sought to perform a full psychometric evaluation of the state of surrender scale in a substance use population. First, we found that the scale had an adequate internal consistency score of 0.84, indicating that this is a reliable measure in this population. Second, the state of surrender scale showed strong content and convergent validity being positively associated with alike scales. Finally, a state of surrender was a key predictor of participants' motivation for change, both in terms of problem recognition and desire for help. The current study is not without its limitations. First, this study utilized a retrospective design requiring participants to recall their past experience with substance use. This leads to the interesting possibility that participants were unable to accurately portray their past experience with substance use. Likewise, we examine the association between a state of surrender and participants' motivation for change. An interesting extension of this work would be to actually examine how a state of surrender is related to more overt substance use behaviors, such as treatment-seeking behavior or even treatment engagement. That said, in light of these limitations, this study provides preliminary empirical support for the notion that the state of surrender scale may be a key predictor of positive substance use change among drug and alcohol users. Here is my contact information. If anybody would like to chat about this or has any questions for me, I strongly encourage you to reach out. And that being said, thank you so much for watching my presentation.